Is not your typical political memoir, the kind of book all leaders usually release before an election. Books that are usually more political than personal, but not the NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh's new memoir, Love and Courage. This is a deeply personal account of some of the most searing moments of his life: sexual abuse, an alcoholic father, racism. And frankly, only at the very end does Mr. Singh get to politics. So how has this shaped his life as he runs to be the next Prime Minister of Canada? Let's find out. Joining me now is NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh. Thanks for being here.
My honor to be here.
Pretty personal stuff. Different memoir, frankly, than I've ever read before. A lot more searing and personal. Of all the things you cover, the sexual abuse, your father, what was the most difficult thing to write about?
The most difficult thing to write about was for certain my dad. Talking about that was something, it was probably the most difficult thing I had to deal with. That and the financial insecurity. That's a big part of the story where we didn't know what was going to happen next. We were worried about how we were going to survive as a family financially. Also something as simple as there's a part in the story where I talk about not knowing if we would have a place to live. And that was a really scary part. So remembering those tough moments was difficult.
Let me just remind our viewers, your father is an immigrant with your mom. He comes over, he's a doctor. His credentials are not recognized in Canada. He works very hard to get those credentials, moves you guys, Windsor, Newfoundland, all over the country. Finally, he gets settled down, but he's an alcoholic. When did you know your dad was an alcoholic?
So it was something that when I was a kid, there were signs that just didn't seem to be totally right. And when I would visit other friends, I then clicked in, this is not normal, that this is not how normally dads would act, or what my dad was doing wasn't what other parents were doing. So I started to realize that this is not normal, and then I started to be a bit embarrassed. If kids were to come over to my house, I'd have to check to see, is my dad okay or not okay? And if he wasn't, I wouldn't want friends to come over, or if they did come over and I didn't know what state my dad was in, it was a big question. I was always worried about that.
How bad did it get? I mean, you described some scenes in there. Eventually, it went to the point where you literally threw your father out. He was tormenting your mother. Your brother and sister were terrified of him. How bad did it get for your dad?
Yeah, it got really bad. I mean, it got so bad that was probably the most difficult decision I had to make in my life, was to say, hey, Dad, I love you, I care about you, but you can't be hurting the people around you. It just doesn't make sense that one person can hurt so many other people. And so I had to make that decision. And he was shocked. I was shocked. It was a difficult thing to do. The word difficult doesn't actually capture how hard that was. That was the hardest moment of my life.
Yeah, the portrayal when he loses his license, difficult. The other element here is you were a 10-year-old boy, you're taking Taekwondo lessons, and your instructor sexually abuses you. Talk about what happened there and how that affected you.
Well, the complexity of the situation is that I went to martial arts because I was being bullied so much in school that my parents wanted me to have more confidence. And it was working. Going to class, training in Taekwondo gave me more self-confidence, made me feel like I could defend myself. And the person that was entrusted with giving me the skills to defend myself was the same person that abused or exploited that relationship to then abuse me. That was really hard to understand. He also, in class, would sometimes stop other kids. There's actually one other kid that would sometimes bully me because I was one of the smallest and youngest. He would bully me and he would stop him from bullying me. So sometimes he would be my protector, and then he was the same person that exploited that vulnerability.
Well, was that part of grooming you?
Probably. I mean,
yeah.
That's the whole idea, that he gained that trust.
Right.
He saw that I was vulnerable. He saw that I needed this. I would train extra before class and after class, do extra push-ups and sit-ups. He could tell that I needed this. I wanted to be stronger. I used to say to my mom all the time, Mom, when will I get bigger? When will I get stronger? And she thought of it as just a kid that wanted to grow up. But I wanted to be stronger, to defend myself and protect my mom and my family.
Did you had a lot of shame you write about. Did you ever tell anyone that you were being sexually abused?
No, and that's one of the hardest things about this story, is that when it happened to me, I thought that there was too much going on, too much burden already on my mom. Things were already unpredictable and unstable. I didn't want to further burden her, so I didn't tell her, even when I had a chance, even when she asked me, because there was some information that there was some allegation out there. And so she said, did anything ever happen to you? And I said, no, not at all. And I also felt in the back of my head that I was to blame, that I could have controlled it, I could have stopped it from happening. I chose to take this special program that he offered, and it was my fault. And I didn't speak about it for a decade. And then when I first spoke about it, it kind of lifted a bit of the weight. But it was really when a dear friend told me that you realize this wasn't your fault. You were a little kid when it happened, that it just released a flood of emotion. And I realized, you know what? yeah, it wasn't my fault. And that's when I really started to heal.
I mean, racial profiling, sexual abuse, you had your father was an alcoholic. How has all this shaped you as a leader of a federal party?
Well, my dad's story is important to mention that it's so complex because he was such a generous and kind and giving person when he wasn't drinking. And his story is such an arc of up and down. And then the fact that I always believed that he would get better, even though it didn't make any sense to believe that. The idea of to love someone that's so complex and that's it's hurting you and hurting your family, that's a part of what I believe is that my dad was ill. He was sick. Addiction is an illness. And when I realized that anger, frustration weren't going to change any of that. That maybe I couldn't help him, but the best I could do was try to continue to love him, provide the support, and hope that he would get better. And that's why I approach everything with this limitless love. This idea that unconditional love and support for our fellow human being is how we move forward. I come from a place where I've understood a little bit of struggles that Canadians face: financial insecurity, feeling like you don't belong, abuse, vulnerability. I understand a bit of what Canadians go through, and I really believe I was only able to make it because people helped me out. Friends, family, and social programs were there for me. Services were there for me when my family needed. My dad got better, not because of a fancy rehab center. He went to a modest, publicly funded rehab center in Windsor that saved his life and saved our family. So I believe in building those services and programs for everybody.
One of the things that I was really struck with reading your book was how your Sikh faith has informed your entire and animated your life and your mission. And it's a very deep part of it, even though you had a lot of racism and you had to deal with that. Now you're going to run for Prime Minister as the first visible minority leader of a major party to do so. Do you worry that some of those same issues you will be confronted with, racism, bias, the inability to be accepted as just a Canadian?
Even though I'm faced with challenges or maybe some barriers, my goal is to find the connection. Even if there's a situation where someone seems to be not someone that wants to hear the message that I have to share, I will still try to find a way to find the connection, something that links us to shared humanity, and that's what I've been informed by. That's what my life story has taught me.
Look what just happened in Quebec, where you need a lot of seats politically. And in Quebec, they've just passed a bill, the so-called secularism bill, where if you wore that turban that you write about, the process of you wearing it, your family, it's so important. You could not be a teacher in Quebec right now if you applied. They'd say, you got to take that off. I imagine you would not take that off. You got to win votes in Quebec. That happens to be a very popular law there right now. What are you going to tell the people of Quebec? Is the secularism law racist?
Well, first off, I don't think it's as widespread, unanimous as we were led to believe. There is a number of parties that have come out. Quebec Solidaire has come out firmly opposed to it entirely. Projet Montréal has also come out and saying this is not something that we support. There's been a number of civil society groups and organizations that have come out and saying this is not what we believe is appropriate. I don't think it's right. I think it's wrong. I think most importantly, though, it's sad. There's so many young kids that could give so much back to society that are now being told that they cannot do something that maybe they dreamed of doing. Maybe a young kid wanted to be a teacher, wanted to be a police officer or a judge, and now is being told that just because of who you are, you cannot do that.
So
that is wrong.
Is it a racist law?
It's wrong. It's a law that is absolutely wrong. I mean, in terms of Quebec society, I understand where they're coming from in terms of why they're so worried about religion. They faced a lot of impact, a negative impact of Catholicism on society. The impact of the church on the state was something that people were really worried about. It offended many people, and it had devastating impacts on the rights of women and the rights of the LGBTQ community. So I get why people are concerned, but this law is wrong.
And so you're going to openly oppose that law?
I've openly said it's wrong.
Tomorrow the House gets back. We're really in the run-up to the election, Jagmeet Singh. There's lots of issues. What will be the top key issues for you when you get back in the House?
Top three things: housing. We need more housing. Canadians are struggling with it. I've heard so many stories. Pharmacare for all. I really want a plan that lifts up everyone, that covers everyone in Canada. And finally, a Canadian version of a Green New Deal. We need to really take action on climate change, given the serious flooding we're seeing here in Ottawa and the impact of climate change on exacerbating ecological and environmental impacts on society, on our country, on people, on families. Forest fires, worse than we've ever seen before. We need to take action.
That's interesting. So the Green New Deal, which comes from the United States, for certain Democratic politicians are saying that. Does that mean suspending all fossil fuel development in Canada? Is that one of the things that would be part of it?
Well, what I want to do is move towards full investments in green energy, ending all investments at the federal stage, immediately ending all subsidies to fossil fuel sectors, and moving towards investments in renewable energy. And we'll have a very bold plan, and we're laying that out. We've done a lot of work in the past. Jack Layton, as you recall, was someone who first came came out with some bold steps around the environment. We've continued that tradition, and now we're going to put out a really strong plan.
Jagmeet Singh, fascinating memoir, Love and Courage. I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks.
Thank you.